Presbyterian home. This place was established in 1903 for orphans all across the Virginia Commonwealth. Well, in 1960s, I should say, they expanded to help those with challenging disabilities for young adults. And in 2014, they changed their name to HumanKind. And today, HumanKind does a lot for the greater Central Virginia. They have many social services that help those to get people back on their feet, such as Early Head Start, several others as well, which don't come to my mind at this point, but they do quite a bit, serving hundreds, if not thousands of people throughout the Virginia Commonwealth. So why am I bringing that up? Well, the fact of the matter is that when we start working about art, we have to know a little about the history of what we're going to be working on. And today we're working on perspective. And using these cottages are going to be showing you how a multifaceted type of perspective using multiple vanishing points work. Come on, we're going to take a look at a few other things. The Presbyterian home, or as we call it today, is HumanKind, also holds several events here. They have quite a few events going on. One of them they have are the high school track and field, well, not track and field, but cross countries for the schools here in the greater Lynchburg, Forest, and Boonesboro areas here. But if you look behind me, basically what we're talking about is perspective. You can see the barn on my right side, and on the left side, there's another barn. Now look at them closely. You can see that we're on two different eye levels. One is probably at the eye level, and this one right over here is below our eye level. So you can see this even becomes a more complex problem altogether. Because not only are we dealing with several different vanishing points, we're different levels altogether, and that's going to throw everything off. This is going to be another photograph that I'm going to take that you're going to attempt to try to mimic and try to see if you can work that out. It's going to be a challenge, but I think it's something you're going to be able to do, and it's going to be something that you're going to have to work with. So let's head back up that direction, and I'll show you some other stuff that we're going to be working on as we get more into this advanced perspective. This facility is on 166 acres of beautiful land, and you can see how picturesque this place really is. I mean, not far from here you can see a church, and it's covered with forest all around. And the reason I've chosen this place is because if you see the cottages behind me, there are actually 6 cottages, and there's some behind that you can't see, but the main ones we're going to be looking at are going to be the main administrative building here, where my wife happens to work, where she works on gift entries. It's probably another reason why I decided to use this place. But anyway, that's a whole different story altogether. All the way over to the other cottage, which is at the far end, right over here. Now notice how they are sitting. Each one of them are on separate vanishing points. And on top of that, they are also sitting at a higher eye level, and the horizon line is also different. So this is going to be rather complex. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a photograph of this area, and then I'm going to do a line drawing, and then we're going to discuss this. And then you're going to attempt to try to pick up or mimic this. It will be quite a bit of a challenge, but that's where we're going from here on in. The challenges of drawing and illustrating get tougher and tougher as they go along. But this is to better your skill as an artist. Come on. We're going to go back over to the studio, and we're going to work on this episode of Advanced Perspective. Let's go.
Don't tell me. We're about to go over a huge waterfall.
Yep.
Sharp rocks at the bottom?
Yep.
Bring it on. Oh yeah!
I have a really bad feeling about this.
Behold, the impossible has happened.
Well, before we go into the cottages and the barns that we looked at HumanKind, let's take a look at another part of perspective that we need to actually address. There's three issues here that we're going to go into first before we go into those that you're going to have to understand a little bit. Now, as I panned across and you can see these homes, the ones that are right behind me, you'll see if they're broken down into boxes. Simple. That's fine. We get that. And we can see that they're in perspective. You can see their vanishing points. You can see where they're going. But now I'm going to add a twist to this. Notice the pitches on the roofs. Well, now here comes the next question. How do we find the right perspective on the pitch of the house or the pitch of the roof? Well, you can't use the vanishing point that's on the horizon line. That's out of the question because you're at a different angle. And that's where this formula comes in. Let's take a look. If you look at the drawing that I've done of the house, first the line drawing, which I have here, and then of course I added the light and shadow to that, you can see that the roof has a pitch that does not match the vanishing point to the horizon. So let's shrink this house down a little smaller so we can see all the vanishing points on the picture plane. Well, first we have our first and second vanishing points. That's pretty obvious, along with the station point. That station point tells us exactly what the closest point of that house is to us. The vanishing point that goes off to the left is the first vanishing point, and the second to the right. So now that we have those down, how do we figure out the angle and pitch of the roof? Well, now let's take a vertical line, and that vertical line is what I call the floating vanishing point. If it goes below the horizon line, it's called the sinking vanishing point. And you can see how that works here. Now that we have that, we can move that vanishing point up or down as long as it stays on that same vanishing point. So let's bring the third vanishing point. And the third vanishing point will be the angle or the pitch of the main roof. You take the closest line to you, which is the station point, and you draw that line directly up to the third vanishing point. You will match when it intersects with the vertical line. You will then match that line up with the back part of the roof, and voila, your vanishing point matches perfectly to what you have on your image. Now, if you notice the gable on the lower part of the roof, it's slightly pitched forward. Well, being that they are on the same line, they're going to line up with the same vertical vanishing point. So all you do is you make another angle, line that up, and then take your second line and move that back to the back line, and there is the pitch of your gable. That's your fourth vanishing point. Your fifth vanishing point is on the front gable. Now, this could be subject to interpretation. That front gable could very much well be matching the same pitch of the roof. But for creative purposes, let's say that the architect slightly made that gable back further. And that's how we're going to find this one. Notice that there's a square there at the top. Well, that's going to be my square that's going to bring my fifth vanishing point, and it's not as low as the fourth vanishing point, but it's not as high as the third vanishing point. It's somewhere in the middle. Once you have all those lined up, you now have a proper perspective in that vanishing point. And that's how you can do that. Opposite is true with the sinking vanishing point. It drops below the horizon line, and those lines that are going down will match to the lid of a box if you're doing something like that, or an opposite pitch to a roof. And either way, that's going to create a perfect vanishing point. All right, let's go to a second part, which is going to be doing a fence and finding the center of that fence. Come on, let's go.
How do we find X?
Ah, behold, the fence. This vanishing point now is a 1 point, but now here is the next part of this exercise, and the next part of the formula that you're going to probably have to utilize. Let's say you're making a fence, or classic, a road with telephone poles, and they're evenly spaced. Here's another one. How about a wall of arches? But you want to find the center part of that. Well, this is going to be another formula, relatively simple, but if you don't know it, it seems rather complicated. Here we go. Notice that we have the fence line behind me, and each one of those vertical stakes where the fence is anchored are evenly placed apart each other. So how do we find the center of that? Well, let's take a look at this diagram, and I'm going to show you. I've created a wall here, and you can see this wall is pretty simple. But now let's say we want to find the center of that wall. Well, if you saw the beginning of the introduction, you'll see that I have a sample of that. But let's say you just didn't really pay attention to it. All right. What I want you to do is I want you to make a mark and figure out where you think the halfway mark is on that wall. Go ahead. I'll give you a couple seconds.
Gotta be my pal. Tell me.
Okay, think you got it? All right. Now here's how we find the center. We make an X. Already you can see where that center of the halfway mark is. And there's your halfway mark. You make your vertical line right where the two lines intersect. Pretty far off, isn't it? It's not quite where you may have thought it was. Okay, so let's say you want to go and make that 1/4. So you make a line from your halfway mark to the end of the wall, and same as opposite. There's your half, or there's your quarter, and your 3/4 mark. If you want to go 1/8, you make another X from the quarter to the wall. There's your 1/8, your 3/8, your 5/8, and your 7/8. But let's say you want to go even further, and you want to make it 1/16. Well, you repeat that, and there you are, 1/16, 3/16, 5/16, 7/16, 9/16, 11/16, and so on and so forth. There you can see how it optically makes a perfect line, a perfect division of that wall. And once we remove those, you can see how the lines are perfectly in sync. Now, it doesn't have to mathematically be exact, but that's an optical correction or an optical correctness in your image. And that's how you create a image that's going to be able to, how do we say, make everything look optically correct. And now the final one is going to be the cube.
Origin and purpose of the cube still unknown.
And now in this diagram, I've shown you the cube here, and I talked a little bit about it, how to make a perfect square. Well, in art, we're just trying to create something that's optically correct. So what you're going to do is you can take the station point of that box, flip it to the side, there's your cube. That's the distance at the back. It's not going to be exact. If you really want to get into it mathematically, then you can create a mathematical formula. But now that starts getting into true geometry, and now we're getting into the mathematical side of that. If you're just illustrating or drawing, you just want to be optically correct. Because I have been to museums and I've never seen a person say, is that box completely correct? Let's measure this out. No. You want it to be optically correct. That's all. You don't want it to look obvious that it's like a shoebox or a vertical box that looks like a milk carton. So all you have to do is take the middle line, flip it to the side, and there you're going to have your perfectly optical illusion of a box. Okay, now that we have that, let's take a look at the vanishing points on the cottages and on those barns. This is where the exercise is going to be really challenging for you. I have some photographs that I'm going to post on there, and I want you to freely use them. Go ahead, use anything you want. As a matter of fact, even this one here. This was part of my book from Crossing the Bridge. You can use that cottage where AJ7 and AJ3 have crossed over their little bridge to head off for their picnic, and utilize that. Practice with it. If you want to use it on something, go right ahead. That's fine. I want you to get out there and give it a try. Do whatever you can, and you're going to find some shortcuts, and you're going to find some other ways. Remember, there's no such thing as cheating or trying to figure out that there's a shortcut to something. No, 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 no. You will find other ways, and you're going to find other people you might be able to connect with a little better in understanding. Remember, I'm just giving you the basics, and that's what we're working on. All right, let's go work. Enough talk, and let's go head off and work on those other projects we have. Ooh, those are going to be tough. You know, I was just kind of going over how far we've come. If you've joined us since the beginning, and you're those few who just started and watched from the very beginning, including my introduction, and you have been practicing, you can see how far we've come, all the way to this stage, which is advanced perspective. Now, what I'm going to do on this particular video, usually I'm drawing, but because of lights, and again, I told you I'm not a really good light person, and we're just starting off and don't have all the fancy equipment, which hopefully will come down later on down the road. A lot of these demonstrations aren't coming out very well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to animate them and then do overlays for the photographs that I took. And then you can see how those perspective lines converge upon one another.
You know, you're really cute, but I don't know what you're saying.
Upon each other. Sometimes the mind starts moving faster than what the mouth will do. Okay, so that each of those vanishing points line up on those horizon lines. Now, I said, you know, the pictures that I gave you or that I have you use, you don't necessarily have to use those. In fact, if you want, I'd encourage you to go out and find your own pictures and take a look at them and use them as reference. Remember, these exercises are to give you an idea of how perspective works so that you can understand it, so that you're able to work under these kind of conditions, or what I mean by these kind of conditions, work and understand what you're seeing. When we go into foreshortening the next episode, you'll see how perspective plays a vital role in understanding how to create that image of depth. For instance, like my hand reaching you, this is foreshortening. My hand is obviously about the size of my head, if not bigger than my head, but in actuality, in proportion, my hands aren't really that big. That's to give more drama. You see that especially with superheroes and tilting the horizon line and creating more. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself.
The name's Captain Carter. What in heavens? Are you seeing this?
But anyhow, that's where we're going, and it's good to use these as reference. And that's the other thing. Reference, reference, reference. There's a young lady out there who's an artist, and kind of follow her. I think she's about 15 or 16, and she's got a wonderful personality. Her name is Becca. But she kind of struck me. She had an open quorum where she was able to talk about her stuff, and she says, oh yeah, well, I had to use reference to this. I had to use reference on that. And the way I was getting it was almost like, yeah, I had to use reference, so therefore it wasn't all that great. No. And I don't know where that idea comes from, where you shouldn't have reference. Always, 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 always use reference. Every single artist, every artist who's really good will use reference. Reference, reference, reference. Always. It's better to have more reference than not enough. If somebody wants me to draw a cow, do you think I'm just going to draw it off the top of my head? No. I'm going to ask, what type of cow do you want? Is it a black Angus? Is it a Jersey? What kind of sheep if they want? Is it a sheep with a black face? Is it a sheep that's all white? Is it a sheep with rams? I mean, I have to find out all kinds of information, and then I'm going to look those animals up. I'm going to find out what that client wants. So don't ever think that just because you draw, you don't have to use a reference. When I was doing a set, and I'll even tell you this last story before we get into this, I was doing the back. It was for Bye Bye Birdie, so I was doing the caboose. So naturally, I started looking up for cabooses that were of that period, and they really haven't changed that much. And as I'm looking at the reference, and I'm interpreting it and putting on my sketch pad to be able to use it as a reference, one of the parents came up to me and said, oh, so that's how you do it. You use a reference, or no, she didn't use the word reference. She goes, oh, so you copy that. I went, it's not copy, it's called a reference. If I copied it, it's called plagiarism. I'm using the reference to be able to figure out what I'm going to use and how it's going to be placed. I don't know everything about a caboose, no more than I know anything a lot about Formula One racing cars. I'm going to definitely use a reference. For instance, the Formula One racing car, the ones they have today, would not fit of the Formula One racing cars of the 60s. They were completely different. So you have to have reference. So all of that to say that if you decide to go and not use any of the references that I have given you, go out and find your own. More power to you. Yes. Okay, enough chit chat. Let's get on. Let's take a look at this reference, which is the one of the cottages, and let's talk about this. Hit it. Okay, so as you can see, we have the 5 cottages. Well, we'll call them 4 cottages and the administration building. Yes, that's my love dove, works there. Mr. Oh, yes. Okay, moving on. Out of the way, out of the way. Thank you. Alrighty. First of all, you can see the horizon line. Now, I've made 2 lines here. There is the horizon line, which is the one in red. And I also have the eye level, which is slightly below that. Now, you're probably saying, you know, well, they're pretty close. In actuality, probably wouldn't make much difference. But as I show you these other references, you're going to see how the eye level and horizon line pretty much play different roles in making your work that much better optically. Okay, so we have our horizon line. Now, you can see here where I have marked the vanishing point lines which go off to their respective vanishing points. And you can see that there are 5 different vanishing points. That's because each one of these cottages are set on a different plane. Remember, this is a semicircle, so they're not all on one straight line. They are banking to the left. The street curves. So each one of these homes are not going to, cottages are not going to be on the same vanishing point. And you can see how each of those lines, so each of those lines match to where those vanishing points are. Now, I've also done a floating vanishing point because if you look closely, you'll see that the line goes up and you'll see the angles of the roof which meet up to the top of the vertical vanishing point, prospectively on each one of the cottages. And that's really important. Now, this gets to be kind of tricky because what you need to do first is to create a rectangular type style roof. Then you can cut the edges and then create that that gable on the top to cut in and create that kind of angle that is on the roof itself. Now, each section you have, let's take a closer look at the administrative building. You'll see the 4 pillars. Well, to make that easier for yourself, you're going to actually make that into a rectangle and then build that up, and then of course gradually erase everything that's out of there. Now, remember what I told you about making the X and finding the center of the wall? Well, here's a classic example. You have 6 windows, actually 7 on the top. So you're going to find the center because it's not the actual dead center. You're going to find slightly off to the right. And then you can subdivide each one of those in order to place those windows correctly. Okay. Now you can see how each one of these have moved into their respective vanishing points. And as I put here, the vanishing point to administrative building and to cottage 1 versus 2, 3, and 4 are not the same facing vanishing points. You can see that now what I'm referring to that is that the administrative building vanishing point, which is now at a slight angle, you can see the green lines which now converge on a vanishing point off to the right. And that's because that administrative building is slightly tilted. It's not facing the square on, whereas cottage number 4 is more or less hitting us straight on. And of course, lastly, which adds more drama to this, is the slope. Remember, we're on a hill, so we've got to make a curvature. Even though you have a straight horizon line, that's consistent. And the reason you have to have your straight vanishing line, horizon line, is because if you didn't and you followed the slope, your houses would be cattywampus. Remember, when they build these homes are level, so you have to have a level set line to base everything off. If you start going off all willy-nilly on just the or not the horizon line, but the landscape line, your homes or whatever you draw is going to be out of whack and out of sync. Now, once again, you can practice with these if you'd like, but you don't have to. Challenge yourself and find something you really want to do. The point of this exercise is to show how vanishing points work. Okay, let's move on to the next one, which is the barn. This one's going to be, although there's less to it, it tends to be a little more complicated. Take a look at this. Okay, so as you can see the barn here, we are slightly now above that line. Now let's lay out the horizon line, and you can see those lines which are heading out away from the barn and off to the horizon lines. And you can see all of those lines which converge. The barn on the right and that white house have a vanishing point way out, almost off the picture plane. And those lines converge way out to the right. Whereas the barn on the left, the shorter one, it has its own vanishing point, and it's smaller right near the center of the picture plane. Now, here is something that you also need to take in consideration. The tall barn next to the short barn on the left side of the picture plane, that barn is almost parallel to the horizon line. It's very, very shallow angle. And it almost, well, if not, matches the vanishing point of the house and the barn on the right side of the picture plane. The barns on the left, and including the stable, as you can see there, that stable is completely parallel to the horizon line. And so you can see that they are slightly off a bit. They don't follow the exact vanishing point. But what's tricky here is that you are so close to the horizon line, you can almost get away without having to use the perspective on the middle barn on the left-hand side, because it's pretty much in between. This is a case of foreshortening. We're turning the barn, we're not seeing the full side, and we're not seeing the full back side. This is what you call a 45-degree angle. And now in this case, the eye level is now above the horizon line, which means that which shows that we are standing above or on top of a hill. And you can see that. That's obviously because we are over on the roof. You can see the top of the roof looking down. Remember what I said at the beginning perspective. And I said, any object below the horizon line, you're going to see the top of that. And anything above the horizon line, you're going to see the bottom. Well, go back and look at the reference here. You can see this is a classic example. We are seeing the top of the barn, which is on the right, and the home on the roofs. Well, now if you look over to the barns on the left, yes, we can see the roof, but we're just about above eye level, below eye level. That eye level is really close to the horizon line. So in a sense, we are still even slightly above that. There's this really, we're starting to split hairs here, but we're very, very close within that realm of where the horizon line is versus the eye level. And you can see how it works. When you're drawing something, always be cognizant of what you're seeing. Am I seeing the top of the object, or am I seeing the bottom of the object? Am I seeing it right in the middle? If I'm seeing it right in the middle, obviously your horizon line and eye level are the same. Now, in this case here, you're not having to really worry about whether the eye level or horizon line are going to make a big difference. It's probably not going to. Now, in a lot of high schools, they really don't emphasize the difference between the eye level and the horizon line. But in this next illustration, you're going to see how it works. Now, I took this photograph. It was a last-minute decision. At the opening of this episode, you'll see how the camera pans, and I'm driving up to HumanKind. And as I was looking at and editing, I said, this is a perfect example of how the difference between eye level and the horizon line work on your illustration. Here, take a look at this one. Okay, so now we have the road which leads up to the main area. And there's my car off over on the right-hand side. Okay, now let's look at this structure here. You have the barn, which is in the upper right-hand corner, and it's sitting nice and pretty, way high, just above that. Now, as I lay my lines down, you can see my horizon line is rather high. All of lines on the barn and the shorter barn, they start to converge down onto the horizon line, and there's my vanishing point. Now look where my eye level is. It's pretty substantially lower than the horizon line. And this is where eye level and horizon line make a big difference. My eye level is very close to the guardrail there. And the reason I can say this, take a look at the guardrail on the far right. You can see we're almost just seeing the lip of that guardrail. Now follow the guardrail and go all the way up, and you can see it predominantly at the top, almost by where the car is. And you can see how drastically that slope starts to move up. And of course, as it moves up further and further, you can see the hill. Now let's just say, for example, you use the horizon line, or excuse me, yeah, as the eye level. Let's say that you use the eye level as your horizon line. I got that straight. Okay. Look what would happen to the barns on the top. Boom. If the vanishing point was moved to the eye level, the barn would distort. Look where those lines are. That brings this all the way down. It brings the lines down. It shoots them down at the bottom, and now your barns look distorted. And this is where it's important to understand the difference between the eye level and the horizon line. At times, the horizon line is going to be higher than your eye level. And other times, the horizon line is going to be lower than your eye level. A good example of that would be if you're in space, underwater. Now, underwater, yes, there is a horizon line, but I've done a lot of scuba diving, and at times you can't see a horizon line. As a matter of fact, you can be distorted, and if you go diving at night, you're not going to see anything. It's going to be like you're in space, inner space, as you would call it. So what do you have to follow? You have to pretty much follow your eye level to see what you're going to paint or what you're going to illustrate as an underwater scene. But let's use this example here. Follow me here. This is going to be a little more of a challenge, and you'll see how this works. Okay. This illustration I did of a shuttle, and this was to give you an idea of how your perspective would work in space. Now keep in mind that a horizon line is where the Earth turns. That's the horizon. Okay? You have that? If you're in space, there is no horizon. You're going to have to follow your eye level. Think about it. If you're in the middle and you're drawing a solar system, you're drawing planets, you're doing something in space, you have no horizon line. There is none. You're in space. There's nothing there. So you're going to have to create your horizon line using your eye level. Well, here's another twist on this. Let's take a look at the shuttle there. The shuttle's vanishing point does not even hit anywhere near the horizon line. Look how that horizon line distorts. It is distorted all the way over because we are so far up in space, you're starting to see the curvature of the Earth. And look where our level is. Our eye level runs right into the nose of the shuttle. It's coming out from the Earth, so now your vanishing point is way down at the bottom. It's nowhere near the horizon line. Why is that? Well, it's launching off from Earth. We're not going to turn around and change that and change the horizon line. You're going to wrestle with yourself. So in all intents and purposes, it's not necessarily always going to end up on the horizon line. You will have to have some sort of vanishing point. Now, how do you figure this one out? Well, you don't have a reference to this. Here's an example you could use. If in this case, let's take a look at the shuttle I have here. I could draw this shuttle, boom, by itself. Here's an example. Draw it all together just by itself and have that there. Then I can, once I have it completely done, then I can overlay it, place it where I want it on my picture plane. Now again, this is just an illustration. The shuttle is slightly in the center. I would have probably moved it over to the left, maybe a little bit to the right, but I wanted to emphasize the exercise of this tutorial here. So I've kind of set it in the center. But that's another way you're able to work in getting the object in which you're illustrating into proper perspective, and then you can overlay that onto your final piece. It takes a little bit of work, but That's what art's all about, is working and getting everything all together. Okay, so now working on what we would have several different points of perspective. And this is more an advanced stage of what we're going on. And again, I've skimmed over the top. It's going to be up to you now to practice these exercises. It's going to be up to you to try and get in here and put your pencil down onto the paper and really practice on working on perspective. I can give you the information. I can even show you how it's done. Heck, I could show you hours and hours of demonstration, but the bottom line is that you're going to have to try and you're going to have to do it. You're going to have to make mistakes. You're going to have to be able to work on this. But if you do have questions, feel free to let me know. I can answer them for you. We could go even further. As a matter of fact, there is one item that is extremely scary for many artists, and it's called the spiral staircase. Yeah, you can see the fear in my eyes. Even this professor nods his head up and down and goes, ooh, it sends chills on my spine. The reason the spiral staircase, that was an exercise we had to do in our undergrad. It drove a lot of us mad. That there are so many vanishing points, and the turn of each one of those steps slightly changes, and you have to find mathematically how it works. Today, it's probably much easier to work on it and use a computer grid on that, where it can find the formula of the correct perspective. It's tough. It's really, really tough. In fact, it would take a full episode just to be able to show how to do a spiral staircase. If I get more than 100 requests, then I'll do it. I'll demonstrate. But if I don't, this professor ain't doing that one. No. Okay. We've pretty much covered a lot in perspective and how it works and what you're trying to create and what you're trying to create an illusion of depth. Remember, two-dimensional art, what we're working on, what we are trying to do is we are trying to create an illusion of 3D on a 2D piece of paper. Now in sculpture, that principle doesn't work because it's actually 3D. It's a statue. It's something that's tangible. But that's what makes perspective so wondrous. It makes it wonderful. It really does. But if you go back to the first steps in what we talked about, it does get kind of frustrating. If you can master the boxes in which we did on the first part, which was beginning or basic perspective, practice that a bit, you can move on to these other principles and really train your eye to see things which are in perspective. And on top of that, you'll be able to spot things that weren't correctly drawn. Now, there are artists you'll see that things aren't done, like Matisse, Gauguin. They knew the rules, and they were breaking them. So if you're going to find something, you better make sure you know that that artist knows what they're doing, okay? Before you accuse them of saying, oh, you made a mistake. They may turn around and say, I meant to do that. You'll find a lot of artists, contemporary artists, that were doing that. They're breaking the rules on perspectives because they know them. Okay, that's going to end this episode. So we are going to now take this next step, and it's going to be foreshortening. And then that's going to lead us into basic fundamentals on proportion of the human body, the canon of the human body, and then we'll work onto the face, which will lead us into portraits. After that, we're then going to move on into charcoal. So that's going to be coming up next, and that's what's heading. That's what we're heading down the road to, so we can move right along. Okay. As always, may the Lord always be with you. Seriously, especially during these times right now that we're in. And that's the other thing. Working in the arts is almost an escape. It creates things that you can build your own world and kind of escape from everything that you're doing. So even if you're not looking at this as a career, it's really nice to be able to do things, to create things, to make things, and hopefully I'm inspiring you to do that. We're also going to be touching a little bit about good old Dr. Bob Ross. I really like him a lot, and I'll tell you a little story about how at first I started falling into that trap of being, oh, who is he? I am a professional artist. I am studying the School of Arts. And the Lord really struck me on the head and said, you know, not everybody wants to get out there and be a professional. They just want to paint. How true, how true. But we're going to talk a little bit about him later on when we get into wet media. And if you do follow Bob Ross, trust me, everything I'm going to teach you here is not going to change anything. If anything, it's going to help you improve on your work. And that's all I want to be able to do for you, is to improve so that you can see things differently. Okay. Well, take care now. Remember, hit that like button. Turn around and subscribe. We're almost at 100 subscribers, and I'm at this point 96, so I'm pretty excited. It just hit the 100 mark. That's exciting to me, because here's the reason I look at it. If I had 100 students that are in my class, that's a success. So for you 96, I am deliberately focusing on you. I want you to be able to have something, as I said earlier, to sink your teeth into so that you're getting something there. All right, this is where we sign off. We will see you next week. Tuesday, our reaction videos. Next week, we'll be back again with foreshortening. Take care.
Pantalabamba!